Alan Kent was 65, a man whose life was largely defined by predictability and small, manageable crises. He was kneeling on the linoleum floor of his modest Aspen Grove apartment, gathering the shards of a shattered ceramic coffee cup when the phone rang. The morning had already been marred by the usual, booming complaints from his neighbor, Maud Caldwell, whose voice cut the thin wall like a chainsaw, accusing Alan's loose automatic sprinkler system of flooding her prized petunias again. Alan ignored the persistent ringing initially, focused on soaking up the spreading coffee puddle with a dish towel. On the fifth ring, he finally stood, tossing the soaked cloth into the sink. "Alan Kent speaking," he answered, his voice weary. The response came from a woman named Celia Albright of Sterling, Albright and Partners in Billings. Her tone was a precise, careful professional cadence Alan recognized instantly, the harbinger of truly significant, usually bad news. "I'm calling regarding Seraphina Eliza Vance." Alan's hand tightened around the receiver. No one had called his ex-wife by her full, formidable name in his presence for 15 years. "What about her?" "I'm very sorry to inform you that Mrs. Vance passed away on Tuesday evening." The news landed like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. Tuesday evening, 3 days ago. 3 days he had spent worrying about a loose sprinkler joint and coffee stains. He sank into his kitchen chair, the familiar creak amplified by the ensuing silence. "How did you get my number?" He finally managed, his voice sounding distant. "Your name was listed in Mrs. Vance's personal effects as an emergency contact. I understand you were previously married." "Previously married?" Alan echoed. 22 years of history, reduced to a legal footnote. "Yes, we divorced in 2010. Celia explained that there would be a reading of the will following the funeral service. You're named as a beneficiary, so your presence would be appreciated." Beneficiary. The word felt utterly foreign. Seraphina had built an immense empire after their divorce, transforming the small consulting business she'd started during their marriage into the monolithic Vance Strategy Group, VSG. What could she possibly have left him? A note? A token of remembrance? Alan agreed to attend the service at Summit View Abbey, and the will reading scheduled for 4:30 that afternoon at the downtown offices. He sat staring at the phone, unable to process the simple, devastating fact that Seraphina, vibrant, stubborn, impossible Seraphina, was gone. The simple act of her passing eclipsed the triviality of Maud's complaints. The whole world seemed muffled and insignificant. The fading afternoon light streaming through his window, the illuminated dust motes dancing like lost memories. Alan was pulled backward, back to a snowy February evening in 1987, standing in the Copper Mug Diner. He'd stopped mid-bite of his apple pie, fork suspended, watching a woman in a red wool coat fiercely arguing with the manager about discriminatory hiring practices. "You're telling me you won't consider female applicants for weekend manager because women can't handle the pressure?" Her voice was clear, uncompromising, echoing across the nearly empty restaurant. She was magnificent in her anger. Sharp cheekbones, a determined jaw, dark hair that caught the fluorescent light. He hoped the manager would keep arguing just so he could listen to her dismantle his logic. She pulled a business card from her purse, sliding it across the counter. "Seraphina Bell, business consultant. Call me when you change your mind about hiring based on qualifications rather than outdated assumptions." As she left, the diner felt smaller, drained of electricity. "That one's trouble," the manager muttered. "No," Alan said, surprising himself with his certainty. "That one's extraordinary." The card lay abandoned. He memorized the phone number before stepping back into the February wind. It took him 3 days to muster the courage to call. "Seraphina Bell," she answered briskly. "This is Alan Kent. We haven't met, but I saw you at the Copper Mug on Friday night." A pause. "The man with the apple pie who defended my honor to the manager? You left a good tip, too." He could hear the smile in her voice. "Have dinner with me." "Somewhere better than the Copper Mug?" he asked. "Definitely a date," he clarified. "Though if you have any advice about convincing beautiful women to have dinner with strangers, I could use the consultation." She laughed, a real, genuine sound. Saturday night. Lorenzo's Bistro on 3rd Street. 7 o'clock. 6 months later. He proposed in that same diner, sliding a ring across the same counter. "Marry me, Serafina Bell. Make me the luckiest man in Montana." "Forever," she whispered on their wedding day in September sunshine, and Alan believed her completely. Marcus arrived 2 years later, a squalling miracle. Alan remembered watching Serafina cradle their son with the fierce determination she brought to everything. But even then, holding that perfect baby, he noticed her eyes drifting occasionally to the business magazine on the nightstand. As Marcus grew, the subtle signs of divergence became impossible to ignore. Serafina's consulting firm landed a massive contract with Mining Consortium, and suddenly they had money for things Alan never imagined. They moved to Crestwood Manor, a house with 3 bathrooms and a kitchen island larger than their first apartment on Willow Lane. "Isn't this wonderful?" Serafina asked one evening, gesturing at the new dining room with its crystal chandelier and table that seated 12. "We can finally entertain properly." Alan missed their old table, scarred by Marcus's coloring projects. The new one demanded coasters and placemats. The entertaining started immediately. Business associates, potential clients, successful couples whose conversations revolve around market share and investment strategies. Alan tried to contribute, but discussions about hedge funds and corporate restructuring left him feeling like he was speaking a foreign language badly. "Alan works at the power plant," Serafina would explain when someone asked, and Alan began hearing an apologetic edge in her voice, as if a steady, necessary job required an excuse. Marcus, however, thrived. At 10, he navigated computer programs Alan had never heard of. At 12, he critiqued the wine choices at restaurants Alan couldn't afford. By 14, "Dad doesn't understand" became his favorite phrase, delivered with the exasperated sigh of someone far too sophisticated for mundane concerns. The first real fight came on Marcus's 15th birthday. Serafina had planned a party that resembled a corporate networking event. Catered food, hired entertainment, a guest list full of business contacts. Alan had wanted a simple barbecue. "This is embarrassing," Alan told her the night before. "He's 15, not 50. He's growing up in a different world than we did, Alan," she said, adjusting a centerpiece with contract negotiation precision. "These connections matter. They will shape his future. What about just being a kid?" Serafina turned to him, and Alan saw a calculation where there had once been warmth. "Being just a kid is a luxury we can't afford to give him. The world is competitive. Either we prepare him to win, or we prepare him to lose." The party was a success by Serafina's standards. But Alan caught Marcus once, standing alone, looking lost among the sophisticated celebration. He was quickly covered by the sophisticated persona Serafina had crafted for him. The years that followed were a slow, inevitable landslide. Family dinners became conference calls. Vacation plans were canceled for client emergencies. "You don't understand the pressure I'm under," she'd say. Alan understood pressure, the kind that came from keeping a power grid running for thousands of people. The difference was his pressure served the community. Hers served the empire. By the time Marcus graduated high school, he had become a stranger. He looked at Alan's suggestion of trade school as if Alan had proposed he become a medieval serf. "That's exactly the kind of thinking that's holding you back, Dad," Marcus said, "already talking like a consultant. You settle for mediocrity. I won't make that mistake." The final explosion occurred during Marcus's senior year. Serafina missed his graduation due to a massive acquisition deal. "This is enough, Serafina," Alan said. "Family has to come first sometimes." She stood in their kitchen, that crystal and granite shrine to success, still in her business suit at midnight. "Don't you dare lecture me about priorities. Everything we have, everything Marcus has accomplished, exists because of my work." "Like what have we lost?" she asked, genuinely puzzled. "Like us," Alan said. "Like being a family instead of a corporation." She stared at him, and Alan saw the answer. They were a business arrangement that had outlived its usefulness. "Maybe it's time we stop pretending this is working," she said quietly. The divorce was swift and devastatingly efficient. Alan got the house on Willow Lane, kept as a rental, and enough money to live modestly. Serafina got everything else, including Marcus's unquestioned loyalty. You're holding him back, too, Marcus told him during one of their last conversations. All this guilt about family values and simple living, it's toxic, Dad. I can't be around that negativity anymore. 15 years later, Alan sat alone in his apartment, wondering why Serafina had remembered his name at all. Friday morning arrived, gray and cold. The drive to Summit View Abbey took Alan through neighborhoods that mapped Aspen Grove's economic divide. His modest complex gave way to the manicured lawns and stone facades where Serafina's circle lived. The chapel was Gothic, whispering of permanence and prosperity. Cars lined the drive, Mercedes, BMWs, Teslas. Alan parked his 15-year-old Honda, feeling like an intruder. Inside, mahogany pews and stained glass framed a crowd of at least 200 people, a low hum of respectful mourning mixed with inevitable business networking. Alan slipped into a back pew, hoping for invisibility. But whispers followed him. Her ex-husband, "Can you believe he's here after what he put her through?" In their narrative, he was the anchor who had nearly drowned her ambitions. Dad. The voice cut through the murmur like a blade. Marcus Van strode down the aisle, his face a mask of disbelief and barely controlled anger. Success radiated from him. Expensive watch, perfect haircut, the confident posture of someone who had never doubted his place. "What are you doing here?" Marcus's voice carried across the chapel, silencing conversations. "I came to pay my respects." Alan met his gaze. "You lost the right to do that 15 years ago," Marcus snarled. "She wouldn't want you here." "Maybe not, but I needed to be here." "For what? To ease your conscience? To play the grieving widower for people who know exactly what kind of husband you were." The chapel was silent. 200 pairs of eyes focused on their confrontation. Alan felt a familiar weight of judgment, but this time, something was different. He had nothing left to lose. Marcus turned to address the gathered mourners, using his practiced authority. "I apologize for this disruption. For those who don't know, this is Alan Kent, the man who spent 22 years holding back one of the most brilliant women this town has ever produced." He gestured toward Alan with casual dismissal. While my mother was building an empire that employed hundreds, he was content to punch a time clock and complain about her ambitions. "Marcus, that's enough," Alan insisted. He took half her assets in the divorce, despite contributing nothing to her success. Then he spent 15 years acting like the victim, and now he shows up expecting sympathy. Marcus addressed the crowd like a prosecutor, reducing 22 years of shared life to a simple story of failure and blame. "My mother died building something that will outlast all of us. She deserved a husband who would have helped her reach those heights, not one who tried to drag her down to his level." The chapel fell silent. Alan stood, exposed to 200 judgmental stares. "Are you finished?" Alan asked quietly. Marcus was surprised by the resistance. "I loved your mother for 40 years, Alan said, his voice carrying clearly through the silence. 22 of them as her husband. 18 more as someone who wished her well despite everything that went wrong between us. I'm not here to make claims or demand recognition. I'm here because once upon a time, we made promises to each other that mattered, and I choose to honor that memory." Alan sat back down. Marcus shot him a final look of contempt before striding toward the front pew. Alan stayed to the eulogy, the readings, and the music, ignoring the pointed dismissal of everyone around him. As the chapel emptied, Alan was approached by a middle-aged man carrying a leather briefcase. Victor Sterling from Sterling, Albright & Partners. The man introduced himself, offering a firm, professional handshake. Sterling insisted on a meeting with both Alan and Marcus. "Your father is specifically named in the will, Marcus. His presence is required by law." Sterling confirmed. Marcus, annoyed but confident, shrugged. "Fine, let's get this over with. Try not to make this more difficult than it needs to be." They walked 3 blocks to Sterling's office, which occupied the top floor of a restored Victorian house. Dark wood, leather-bound books, prestigious but not ostentatious. Alan felt his peripheral status, taking the chair slightly to the side of the mahogany desk. Sterling opened a thick file folder. "This is the last will and testament of Serafina Eliza Vance, executed on March 15, 2024. Marcus leaned forward, anticipation radiating off him. "I hereby make the following specific bequests and devices," Sterling began. "To my beloved son, Marcus Michael Vance, I leave the family home at Crestwood Manor, along with all furnishings, artwork, and personal property contained therein." Marcus smiled, satisfied. The house alone was worth at least $800,000. "Additionally," Sterling continued, "I bequeath to Marcus the sum of $500,000 to be transferred from my primary investment account within 60 days of probate." Marcus's smile flickered slightly. $500,000, and the house were significant. But where was the company? That's wonderful, of course. But what about Mom's business interests? The company? Sterling lifted the second page. "I'm continuing with the specific bequests, Marcus. Please allow me to finish reading the relevant sections." He read a condition. "The inheritance is contingent upon his continued employment with Vance Strategy Group for a minimum of 2 years following the date of this will's execution, or until such time as the company is sold or dissolved." Marcus looked genuinely confused. Conditions? And until the company is sold? Mom would never sell the company. It was her life's work. Sterling cleaned his glasses carefully. "Your mother's will contain additional provisions that address the disposition of her remaining assets, the company, her investment portfolio, and several other significant holdings." "Well, then let's hear them," Marcus demanded, his confidence wearing thin. Sterling emphasized that these documents represented Mrs. Vance's final, considered wishes, prepared after extensive discussion. He looked directly at Alan, a mixture of sympathy and professional obligation tightening Alan's stomach. "However," Sterling said, his voice grave, "there are additional provisions that fundamentally alter the distribution of Mrs. Vance's estate." Sterling turned to the third page. "To my former husband, Alan Michael Kent," he read, his words falling into the quiet office like stones into still water, "I bequeath a sum of $33.5 million to be transferred from my primary investment accounts and securities portfolio." Alan's mouth fell open. $33.5 million. The number was colossal, unreal. "There must be some mistake," Alan managed, his voice distant. "Did you say 33 million? $33.5 million, yes," Sterling confirmed. Marcus's face went completely white, then flushed violently red. "What did you just say?" "Additionally," Sterling continued, "I transferred to Alan Kent controlling interest in Vance Strategy Group, including all subsidiary companies, real estate holdings, and business assets. This transfer includes 65% ownership of all corporate entities and an appointment as chairman of the board of directors." Alan couldn't breathe. Controlling interest in Serafina's empire, the source of wealth that had made him feel so inadequate. She was giving it all to him. This can't be right. There has to be an error. "I assure you, Mr. Kent, there is no error," Sterling replied. "These documents were prepared under Mrs. Vance's direct supervision. She reviewed every word." Marcus shot to his feet, his chair striking the wall. "This is impossible. She wouldn't. What did you do? How did you manipulate her?" "I didn't do anything," Alan said weakly. "I haven't spoken to your mother in 15 years. "Bullsh!" Marcus screamed. "People don't just give away $33 million to their ex-husbands for no reason. You must have gotten to her somehow." Sterling's voice cut through the rising hysteria. Mrs. Vance was a completely sound mind when she executed these documents. She underwent a thorough mental competency evaluation specifically to prevent any future challenges. "But why?" Alan asked, the question emerging from deep disbelief. "Mrs. Vance left specific instructions regarding that question," Sterling said. "She asked me to share a personal message with you after reading these provisions." "A personal message?" Marcus sputtered, rage and betrayal contorting his face. "She left him a personal message, but cut me out of everything that mattered." "You received a substantial inheritance, Marcus," Sterling reminded him calmly. $500,000 and a valuable property. That represents more wealth than most people see in their lifetimes. Compared to what he's getting, Marcus pointed a shaking finger at Alan. "You're talking about hundreds of millions in total assets. This is fraud, criminal fraud. You walked away from us. Marcus shrieked at Alan. You took your pathetic settlement and disappeared into your pathetic little life while she built an empire, and now you wanted to believe she decided to hand it all over to you. She explained her decision, Sterling stated calmly. Explained her decision? To betray her only son. Marcus laughed bitterly. She left a personal message for your father? The word father seemed to wound him, his rage briefly dissolving into pain. He's not my father. My father would have supported her dreams. You're nothing but a failed man who couldn't handle being married to someone better than you. Maybe you're right, Alan conceded quietly. Maybe I wasn't the husband she deserved. But I never asked for this. She was neither sick nor vulnerable when she made these decisions. Sterling interrupted, his professional patience finally showing strain. She was, in fact, more determined and clear-minded than I had ever seen her. Then why? Marcus demanded, his voice cracking. Why would she do this to me? I was everything she wanted me to be. I became the son she could be proud of. Sterling reached for another envelope, cream-colored stationery marked with Seraphina's familiar handwriting. He held up his hand, commanding silence. Seraphina knew this moment would be difficult, Sterling began. She asked me to read this personal message after the will was announced. Alan and Marcus listened, frozen. Sterling began reading Seraphina's own words. My dearest Alan, if you're hearing this, it means I'm gone, and you're probably sitting in Victor's office wondering if the entire world has lost its mind. I can picture your face, that expression you used to get when I'd rearrange the living room furniture without warning. Confused, but try and be polite about it. A ghost of a smile touched Alan's lips. She knew him perfectly. I know this inheritance comes as a shock. I know you're probably thinking there's been some terrible mistake, that you don't deserve this money or this responsibility. But Alan, you're wrong. You deserve every penny, and I'm going to tell you why. I never stopped loving you, the letter continued. Not during our worst fights. Not during the divorce proceedings. Not during these 15 years of stubborn silence. I was angry with you for not understanding my ambitions, but I was angry with myself for choosing those ambitions over our marriage. You tried to save us. Alan, you begged me to find balance, to remember what mattered. I was too proud and too afraid to listen. Tears started hot and unexpected, as decades of guilt dissolved into impossible absolution. Marcus, the message continued, and Alan's son snapped his head up. My beautiful, brilliant boy, I know you're furious right now, probably convinced your father somehow manipulated me. But, sweetheart, you're not ready for this inheritance. Not yet. Marcus went pale. You've lived your entire adult life in the shadow of my success, accepting the benefits without understanding the responsibility, the letter explained. You've never had to build something from nothing. You've never had to make the hard choices that wealth requires. More importantly, you spent 15 years hating a good man for crimes he never committed. Alan realized his quiet life of dignity and service meant something profound. Alan taught me about character, about integrity, about the kind of strength that doesn't need to prove itself through cruelty or judgment. I forgot those lessons when I chose money over marriage, business over love, but I never forgot the man who taught them to me. Marcus, you have received enough to live comfortably and explore who you might become without the weight of unlimited wealth. Learn to build something yourself. Learn to value people over profit. Learn to forgive your father for the crime of being human and imperfect. Marcus made a sound like a wounded animal. Alan, you're inheriting more than money. You're inheriting the chance to do what I should have done, to use wealth as a tool for good rather than a weapon for proving superiority. I trust you because you never wanted this, because you'll never use it to hurt people the way I sometimes did. When Sterling finished, the office fell into a profound silence. He folded the letter carefully and handed the original to Alan, who held the final conversation he would ever have with Seraphina against his chest. This isn't over, Marcus said quietly, though the fire had gone out of his voice, replaced by cold desperation. I can contest this. Mental incapacity, undue influence, fraud. There are ways to challenge a will. Alan looked at him, seeing a man who had spent his life expecting the world to bend to his wishes. You could try, Alan said gently. But your mother was right, Marcus. You're not ready for this responsibility. And you are. Marcus's laugh was bitter and hollow. You're nobody, Dad. A retired power plant worker with no business experience, no connections, no understanding of what it takes to run a company worth hundreds of millions. Serafina's words echoed in Alan's mind. You deserve every penny. Maybe you're right, Alan conceded, standing up slowly. Maybe I don't know anything about running a business empire, but I know something your mother valued more than business expertise. What's that? I know the difference between serving others and serving myself. Marcus's face twisted in a final flash of rage. This is insane. She was sick. She wasn't thinking clearly. Your mother was 62 years old and in perfect mental health when she executed these documents. Sterling interjected, definitively. Then why would she do this to me? Marcus pleaded, his voice cracking like a teenager's. Alan felt a surge of unexpected compassion for the angry, broken man who was still his son. She didn't do it to you, Marcus. She did it for you. She gave you a chance to discover who you are when you're not living in the shadow of unlimited wealth. I want what's rightfully mine. Marcus exploded, the force of 15 years of entitlement rushing out. What's rightfully yours, Alan replied quietly, is $500,000 and a house worth nearly $1 million. That's more than most people see in a lifetime. What you think you deserved was never really yours to begin with. Marcus stared at him, finally realizing that the man he had publicly humiliated was no longer seeking his approval. You think you've won, Marcus said, gathering his coat with shaking hands. You think this makes you some kind of hero. No, Alan replied, feeling the truth in his bones. I think it makes me responsible. Marcus stood at the office door, seeming smaller than when he had entered. This isn't finished. Yes, it is, Alan said gently. This finished the moment your mother made her choice. The only question now is what you do with the life she's given you. Marcus left without another word. Sterling began organizing papers. There will be paperwork to complete, accounts to transfer, board meetings to schedule. The company's current management team is excellent. They can help you transition into your new role. Victor, can I ask you something? Alan asked. Did she really love me, even after everything that went wrong between us? Sterling smiled, the first genuine smile Alan had seen all day. Alan, she talked about you every time we met. Not about the divorce, not about the problems, about the man who taught her that success without character is just expensive failure. Alan walked out of that office a different man. The afternoon sun felt warmer, the air cleaner. He had work to do, responsibilities to embrace, a company to learn about and improve. But for the first time in 15 years, he felt worthy of a challenge. Justice, he realized, wasn't about revenge or vindication. It was about recognition. The recognition that character matters more than credentials, and that real love never truly dies.